In March, we celebrated International Women's Day. Throughout the month, we've had the great pleasure of sitting down with extraordinary women from all walks of life who've achieved great things. We not only want to thank these women for their contributions, but all women from coast to coast and around the world who mentor, support, and educate others and help them to find lasting success. One day isn't enough, and neither is a month. And there's lots more to be done to fully recognize and appreciate the role that women play, not just in career education, but in all fields of work and life.
We want to go back 10, maximum 15 years, because the job you were doing 10 or 15 years ago is probably not the job you want to be doing now. So with your grads, their education needs to go.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm Michael Sangster, your host. We've got a special guest for you today to talk about careers. Someone does something for a reason, but if you want that zippy gig, you have to be able to articulate your zippy skills. Yes, having the right skills is important, but it's also important to communicate and portray confidence in those skills. That's where Sheila Musgrove, the founder of Tag Recruitment, an Amazon best-selling author, comes in. Sheila, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk all about zippy gigs.
Zippy gigs. You and I became fast friends when you found me at the Connexus conference in Ottawa, and your energy and your style, your joie de vivre, it came through right away. You were easily recognizable with your hair, aren't you?
I think it took you all of about 30 seconds to find me in that crowded expo hall. So yes.
It's an important skill to be seen, right? To be noticed, to be found.
Indeed.
So let's dive right in. Tell us about Tag Recruitment and Sheila Musgrove.
Perfect. Well, Tag Recruitment. I've had Tag Recruitment. It's a Calgary-based boutique recruitment firm nearing 19 years. So I've interviewed a lot of people, and I can tell you what virtually everybody does wrong on their resume. So that I'm excited to talk about today. And I wrote my first Amazon best-selling book actually 8 years ago. It's called Hired: How to Get the Zippy Gig, Insider Secrets from a Top Recruiter. So first edition came out 8 years ago. The pandemic changed things and the world of work changed. So I updated and wrote a second edition 2 years ago, added 5 new chapters and a pile of new content. It actually became an Amazon bestseller in just over 3 hours of being released.
You also created a Ukrainian version, didn't you, for people who've come to Canada?
I did. I just, we all saw those, the news stories of people having to flee their beloved country. And I just thought, I need to have my book translated into Ukrainian. I thought it would be a nicer, easier way for people to land in Canada and be able to have a resource to help them to land work fast. So yeah, the Ukrainian version came out in 22 as well.
Well, good for you. I know we've handed a few versions of that out. You spoke at our conference last fall in Calgary, and going to have you back next fall at our event in Toronto. And we are doing more and more. Actually, I guess you were in Toronto with us this spring too, talking about careers and resumes and getting noticed. And I know that the audience took a lot out of what you were saying, and it was greatly appreciated. Our career professionals that deal with students every year. And I had a college leader in Calgary leave the conference, walk out the door to me and say, well, I'm doing everything wrong when it comes to resumes. and I believe you're working with her now on some projects.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah, I remember that feedback, and she said, we think we are giving our students all the best advice to leave college and be armed with a great resume and interview skills. And she said, yeah, we're doing everything wrong. So that's where I can help for sure.
So let's dive right in. Let's get real about a couple of things here. And we warned you there's a couple of questions we ask everybody, but you are uniquely positioned. I'm going to change a question we usually ask here. We usually ask people what's a skill they wish they had earlier. I'm going to ask something different from you, Sheila. What's a skill that almost every employer puts on their job postings that they're looking for, and how are people meeting those, not meeting those requirements, or maybe even communicating the skills they have the way you talk about in your program?
Yeah. So, well, the skills range drastically per position. So, what I can tell you is what most college grads and most job seekers do wrong on their resume. So, that's where I'd love to go. And unfortunately, what job seekers at all career levels, including new grads, use stale, outdated resumes that don't do anything to help them to get noticed. And particular new grads, when there's a lot of competition. And so in speaking with the NAC members, most of those members they're teaching those same old outdated strategies. And you may ask, well, what is the outdated resume strategy? Well, it's called a functional resume. And it's when you fill your resume with 1 or 2 or 3 pages of bullets that describe your functional job duties. That does nothing to get you noticed. And the problem with that kind of resume is it looks exactly like the last 47 resumes that hiring manager has read. It looks identical. And the problem with that type of resume is it only tells me what your job is or was. But what I really want to know is what your job is or was, but I can tell that by the title. More importantly, I want to know how well have you performed in each of your jobs? Are you the very best performing person on the team, or are you a day or 2 away from being let go because of performance? A functional resume also makes job interviews so much harder than they need to be. So there's definitely a better way.
Interesting. I've long been a believer, and until this job, I had never done a job interview.
Wow.
And I did that at 52 and a half years old. I had lunch meetings where I ended up getting job offers. I had people I worked with, people I knew, but I never really sat down for a formal job interviews because I'm a serial networker
Right.
and I never stop talking to people and building relationships. Sometimes I'm good at it, sometimes I'm not. But I'm interested from your point of view because the vast majority of jobs come out of interviews and applications, don't they? So how do you pop? How do you come off the page?
Absolutely. Well, first, it starts with the great resume. We'll talk about, I'll tie in the resumes first. So in order to deliver a great interview, it actually starts with a really solid resume. And those functional resumes don't cut it. Don't cut it. And I'll tell you why. So the 2-step resume formula that I created in my book, Hired, it's very simple. So step 1, you would answer in 1 to 3 sentences the answer to really 4 questions. What level did you report to by title? Briefly, what is or was your job? What's your scope, meaning geography, if applicable, and how many other people did what you did? So that's step 1. And that helps to really make your job easy to understand. And as we all know, simple isn't easy, but it will make an impact in the interview. And then step 2 of the formula is really where the magic happens. For every single bullet that's on your resume right now, the functional bullet, you want to ask yourself, is there something that we can measure? Numbers, percentages, and rankings. So that's the 2-step resume formula. So back to your question, how do you deliver an impactful interview? Well, the big aha came when I was writing the first edition of Hired. And I was sitting here in my home office, looking at my blank computer screen, thinking, why are interviews so difficult for people? And what on earth am I going to write about? Because interviews are so easy. The big aha was this. When a hiring manager says, great, Michael, tell me about your role at the NACC, what they're actually looking for are the answer to 5 questions. But get this, no hiring manager asks them. They just leave you out there to say, tell me about your role. Walk me through your entire background. Bring your resume to life for me. And they just hope that you actually tell them something interesting. So the 5 questions are, what level did you report to by title? Briefly, what is or was your job? What's your scope? How many other people did what you did? And tell me, where were you successful? So ironically, it's the two-step resume formula that I wrote in my book. So when you take the time, and I encourage all new grads who are in a competitive job market, if you write your resume based on the two-step resume formula and then rehearse out loud how you're going to answer and walk through your entire interview, you're going to own that interview. Every candidate I've ever coached goes into an interview with such tremendous confidence because they can nail that really hard question.
So we're going to tear my resume apart in a couple of
Yeah.
minutes because I thought, what better way to look at this process than to have you look at my stale 55-year-old man's one? But before we get there, I think people would be interested because they're getting a bit of a master class here. And shame on me if I don't say the book is called Hired and it's available on Amazon because I think it's valuable. I've been through it. It's got some marks in it. I thought it was very good. And I've talked to colleges about different pieces of it. But what's the process look like now when you put in a resume to a system? Because it's a computer system now. It's not a human being at the other end in most cases, is it? And I think it's a mystery to people applying for jobs how to get through.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to go through your resume. You've done a good job on it, but I've definitely got some tips for you. So yes, when you upload to a website, that's called an applicant tracking system or an ATS system. And there are definitely, I wrote a full chapter on how you hit the black hole when uploading by some big mistakes on your resume. So things like a lot of heavy formatting, PDFs often don't upload well, lots of additional formatting, extra lines, shading, all those things can tangle with an ATS system. So yeah, we very often, most companies, bigger companies use an ATS system. I'll be honest though, a lot of recruiters and hiring managers still will go say, okay, even though these resumes are ranked lower by the words, we're still going to take a look at them. So I think people do give too much credit to ATS systems. There is probably more human involvement than you realize.
That's good to hear. That makes me feel good about things. But I would assume a higher level job, it's going to have more intervention of human beings and there'll be more computerized on those entry level positions, which makes it even more important to stand out, understand how the system works.
Absolutely. You're 100% correct.
So, and I know I've seen the frustration from people that can't get through the system, and it's important, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And it is. It's the reason people get overlooked is because that functional, old school, outdated, I call them rusty resumes, they don't work because there's nothing that resume shows for a candidate to make them interesting. They look, as I said earlier, they look exactly the same as the last 47 resumes that I've read. So using the two-step resume formula, it will absolutely get you noticed. I mean, I hear that from job seekers that I coach, people that read my books. Once they edit their resume to focus on that formula and on results, it's a game changer.
Another little curveball, and we'll get back to my resume. You work with career colleges, you work with community colleges, you work with universities. How can career colleges be better at preparing their graduates for the career search post graduation, before graduation, and maybe even a little bit of a rant if you want on the skills that you see employers looking for that students just do not leave school with?
Yeah, I work with colleges, universities, career colleges throughout the country and into the US. I keep going back. I sound like a broken record to say what people are teaching is that outdated resume formula. So it does absolutely nothing to make that student stand out in the sea of competition. So the one thing employers are actually looking for is a track record of results, whether that be academically, whether that be maybe you worked a part-time job while you were in college. And people will often say, oh, well, that was a survival job. I was a server. I was working in retail while I was in college. Those are actually really important things to still put on your resume. So what you're saying to an employer is that, well, while carrying a full course load, I worked 20 hours per week at ABC restaurant, and I was asked to train or mentor others. You can talk about all kinds of successes. And that's really what an employer is looking for is, in addition to the skill to do the job, what they're looking for is a track record. How well have you performed? We've all heard of behavioral-based interview questions. And in my book, I call them the dreaded tell me about a time questions. No one likes them. And they really don't tell a hiring manager much about you because they tend to focus on negative. And I do poke a bit of fun at those questions in my book. So what the behavioral-based questions were aimed at asking or trying to uncover was past performance. But most of those questions fall short. So that's why if you can show that you have been successful in school, in your part-time jobs, in your summer jobs, even in your previous work experience from another country, those are all examples showing a future employer how well you're going to perform in your next job. So if you've naturally found ways to stand out, to be successful in your jobs, well, what are the odds you're going to be successful in the next job? Pretty good. So you become a really easy to be hired candidate if you can showcase results. And it also, again, makes the interview so much more interesting and very comfortable for the candidate. And the hiring manager is, if you can come to talk about results, you're certainly going to be a standout amongst all of the other interviews.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's look at my resume. I know you said
Okay.
it was all marked up and you were waving it at me earlier. What would I do to make that better?
Okay. Well, you've done lots of great things. So font sizes matter. So if you remember from the keynote, I use a stat, 80% of resumes are rejected in under 11 seconds. Now, people think, job seekers are shocked to learn that resumes are skimmed in under 11 seconds. We don't read them word for word. People think that we're going to look at this long resume filled with lots and lots of words and we're going to read every word. No, we skim. So the first part of your resume, your name is exactly the right size. Your name should always be 16, 18 font. You want that to stand out. Now you've got a beautiful graphic around your name. Looks very cool. Earlier to your point, that probably would tangle with the ATS system. So no, even though it looks lovely and visually very interesting, it's probably going to tangle. You've also got lots of shading for some feedback, some headings. Two things. We still actually print resumes. So I'm probably, I can't remember if this was, I think it was blue. If my cyan ink cartridge is about to be emptied and I print your resume and it stops printing because you've now drained my cyan ink tank, I'm probably going to be choked at Michael Sangster for doing that beautiful formatting. So stay away from formatting. Also, your contact details are in a shaded area. That may or may not be able to parse through the ATS system. So it actually may parse through and we don't have any contact info for you. Anything that's in a text box or heavy shading likely won't be read. And so it could be read as blank or it could translate into a 48 font. You just never know. So avoid heavy formatting. You've got lines between a lot of your different positions. Same thing. The ATS system can't understand those additional lines. So remove the lines. Now, even with my big black glasses on, I think your resume is in a 9 font. So I can read it, but it really should be a bit bigger. So the body of your resume should be 10 to 12 font. The resume categories need to be a bit bigger. You've got them highlighted, but rather take the highlighting off, make them a 12 to 14 font. Then we're going to have fun with this. You probably spent a ton of time on your career summary. So you've got some beautiful words, leadership, business acumen, strategic thinking, all sorts of amazing words. Well, one, of course, that doesn't get read. But the reason it doesn't get read is because all that tells me is what leadership words resonate with you. So I want to know more about your results of being a strategic thinker or a strategic leader. So that top part of your resume is very valuable real estate. So the more of your career history, or for your grads, their education first, the more you can get on the first page, the better. So that whole beautiful top part that won't get read. The only 2 words that stand out to me are 30 years. Now, I actually did a radio interview a couple of years ago with CBC, and a gentleman called in and said, I have 30 years of experience and I'm not getting noticed. And I said, well, we're all taught to be really proud of our years of experience and we wear it as a badge of honor. But to your earlier point, when you said, well, sometimes you can have resumes are vetted by someone else rather than an applicant tracking system. If I had, let's say, a junior assistant vetting resumes for me, and let's say that they're not even, their age isn't even 30 years, they may think, how old is this person? So we sometimes want to keep our age a little bit to ourselves and not lead with the years of experience. Couple of ideas there. Then the only other part that stands out there is 20 million, that you manage budgets of 20 million. Now, I don't know, was that 20 years ago or was that recently? We need to put the categories and the highlights with the positions. Now, here's all the things. You did a ton of things right. Lots of things you did great. The first one, you've got things in the right spot. Dates always go on the right-hand side. That's just where we look for them. So that you've got them there. Company name and title go on the left-hand side. You've got some amazing, amazing results. They're all listed here, but because we're so used to, as hiring managers, reading resumes that are filled with bullets that are functional job duties rather than results, we may miss this. We may miss all of these. So what I would add on your resume is the heading. I always recommend a heading ahead of your results. Key achievements, successes, whatever the word resonates with you, use that in every single one of your positions, because what you're optically saying to the hiring manager is, wait a minute, stop, read. There's something important here, which you've got numbers, percentages, rankings. We just need a heading ahead of them to say, here's stop and read here because there's something really important to read here. And you've got great results. They're, again, numbers, percentages, rankings. So it's all very good.
That's there's a lot of gold there. I think we'll probably post my resume alongside this podcast, the original version.
Okay.
So that people can see what you were referencing to, so they can understand. That's about 5 years old, I think. I know it was pre-COVID. I engaged someone to write that for me. Okay. And that would have been pre-COVID who put the boxes together and the shading and the different things. So it's very interesting. And it's funny that it goes back to the conversation earlier about the automated system. So you're going to that's going to block, that's going to not be able to be read. Things I didn't think about.
Absolutely. But it looks nice.
And I think I've used it more lately for events and speeches and other things than as a resume. So it's really good. And I thought that was a valuable way of getting, and these are all things in your book and things that you've been telling our colleges about and helping them pass that on to their graduates and their students. Because one of the things, not to be an advertisement about the career college sector, but our students are a little older and they're sometimes going into a second career and they might have gaps.
Absolutely.
It could be a 10-year gap of being a parent, and they've got to build a way of presenting themselves in a light that hiring people look at.
Absolutely. And to your point on gaps, pre-COVID, hiring managers, recruiters, we didn't like to see gaps on resumes. It was ridiculous. And really what we were saying is, whatever do you mean you took a pause on your career? Well, guess what? You can take a pause in your career. So I have a full chapter on how to cover gaps. And that's okay. Maybe you moved from a different country. You're not going to do that over a weekend. You may have had caregiver responsibilities out of country. There's all sorts of reasons. And most job seekers just hope that you don't notice the gap. But rather, I've got all kinds of ideas on how to cover gaps and even talk about successes during gaps. So maybe you were laid off during the pandemic and you were off for a year or 2 years. I always say to job seekers, it's not like you sat back and binge watched Netflix for 2 years. You were doing stuff. So even if you were doing things not related to your career, put those as a key success on your resume.
Some of us binge watched and gained 20 pounds during COVID, though.
You can do that too. You could put that as a highlight. I managed to get through 22 17 episode series. Great. Then what did you learn?
My oldest daughter and I could actually put on our resumes that we opened a basement bar in our house in the furnace room where we put in a bar and lit it with Christmas lights and spent many nights down there playing crokinole because there was nothing else to do, and had a lot of great conversations down there. I don't think it's resume worthy though. And if you've listened to the podcast, we always have a little bit of fun, a little bit of a joking around. I want to go back, and then we always have a strong finish, but I've got one other question before the strong finish.
Okay.
I'm intrigued on how do you manage the career experience? Because I always go back to Prime Minister Chrétien when someone asked him about the length of the age of his chief of staff, and the question back, or the answer back from the Prime Minister was, I never thought being the chief of staff to the Prime Minister was an entry level job. So I thought that as just a little chuckle as we get into this. But how do you that point about getting your skills across but not looking old is important for some in the process.
Okay, good question. You need to be careful of dates. So the temptation is go back to the beginning of time, go back to, and I always say the 80s, the 90s, they were great eras, but we need to be careful on putting old dates. And you don't want to go back to the beginning of time. You want to go back 10, maximum 15 years, because the job you were doing 10 or 15 years ago is probably not the job you want to be doing now. So with your grads, their education needs to go on the first page. And as well, I would recommend if they had a different career before, do a target position. So it is really clear that I may have been a geologist, but now I want to be in healthcare. So make it really clear what your target position is, but don't go back to the beginning of time. Make sure your dates aren't really old. So that's one way that we can get around people saying, oh, okay. So the dates are really the giveaway of age. So you want to be careful with your dates.
Great answer. Before I go to the last question, we ask everybody, anything you want to get across? If you had a moment you want to talk about one thing, and I'm going to make sure you tell people what your website is because you won't. And again, Hired, the book available on Amazon. But tell me a little bit, anything you want to talk about, a little message for the team.
Sure. And I thank you for the plug on my book. The full name is Hired, How to Get the Zippy Gig Insider Secrets from a Top Recruiter. Had I known how many times I would say that title in the last 8 years, I probably would have left it at Hired. And it's the second edition, giant ball next to my head. You want to get the 2022 edition because there's loads and loads of examples in there. The one point I would get across is just how incredibly important changing your resume from the old school functional resume to my two-step resume formula. It changes the landscape completely for job seekers. They get noticed. They know what to say, how to walk into an interview confidently. It makes the whole job search process much easier than working with that old school functional resume.
Sheila will know why I'm stuck on the word hired, because it's in red 72 font. It's on my desk at my office always. And
Awesome.
it does jump, right? That word hired jumps off that front page. So let's get to our final question. We always ask people, because this is about education, it's about skills development, our podcast, but it's also about life experiences. And everybody we've had on has had a moment to talk about a mentor they've had in their life. And I like to do this because I've realized in my travels of my career is you're mentoring every day and you don't realize you're doing it. You might be mentoring in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
You might be mentoring in a good way. And maybe pulling people's stories out will help us make everybody else realize those people in their lives that have made a difference and how you can do that for someone too. So Sheila, talk to us about a great mentor in your life.
Awesome. Well, I've got a little bit of a unique answer to that question. So my second book is called Unexpected Mentors, Weird and Creative Ideas to Boost Your Career. So the inspiration for that book was, I think a lot of people and a lot of job seekers that I've worked with over the years, they have come to me and said, I feel like my career has been at a disadvantage because I haven't had a formal career mentor. So the essence of that book is 18 overlooked, undervalued, or never thought of ideas for career inspiration or mentorship. So there's all kinds of other areas to find mentorship. So maybe that's another podcast on all of the weird and wonderful ideas of where you can find inspiration and mentorship. But I will, to your point, I did write about one of my mentors, and she was the Canadian leader of an organization I was part of before starting my own staffing company. She was an incredible breath of fresh air into an organization that really was kind of stale and outdated. And I wrote about her in my book, and that she was such an incredible mentor to me. And the point of that book was exactly your point, is that she had no idea that she had had such a profound impact on my career until I sent her a copy of my book and said, "Oh, by the way, you were one of my best mentors ever."
That's a great story. We've had a lot of those. We've encouraged people to share them. It's funny, every one of these podcasts, and I think this is 21 or 22 we're on, we've had I've had a different name in the back of my head.
Yeah.
We don't have one in our lifetime. We don't have two. And I was on one of our original podcasts. We had somebody on with Goldie Hyder, started talking about one of his, Mike Coates. And then Mike Coates' daughter got in touch with me because she heard it. And then we went out for lunch and we got talking about things that we could do together in the community. And I've told that story before, but it's amazing how everything circles around. So I'm going to leave it there for today. Sheila, I have loved getting to know you. We always kind of pass each other in airports or never quite get together and break bread, but you've been a great speaker to our members, and we're getting you working with more of them. You've got a great program that we're rolling out with them. Not to be an advertisement for that, but we really appreciate your time and effort and what you're trying to do to help students, help learners, and help anyone who's just trying to get that next great job.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. And hopefully we will get an opportunity to break bread and not be passing in a hallway.
It's funny. That's one of the skills that I talk about, is breaking bread, is that stopping and sitting with someone, connecting, having a conversation, and getting to know each other, because then the big issues become smaller and the little things you can do become greater. So I enjoy that idea of using that phrase. So with that, we'll end today's podcast. Thank you, Sheila, for joining us. I look forward to seeing you again soon. And I look forward to you all joining us again on next week's edition of EdUp Canada. Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4 or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts, so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.